What if I told you there was a master plan for human history? I mean, what if an ancient text, written over 2,500 years ago, actually laid out a prophetic roadmap, predicting the rise and fall of great empires right up to the very end of civilization as we know it? Well, the source material we're digging into today claims to hold that exact key. So, let's unlock this thing and see where it takes us.
So, here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the blueprint itself, how it's supposed to work. Then we'll try to figure out what its strange symbols and beasts actually mean. After that, we'll trace the controversial legacy of Rome right into our modern world. And finally, we'll get to the really wild part, the specific countdown it lays out for the end times.
All right, let's dive right in. Our journey begins with the core idea from this text. It argues that a series of visions from the ancient book of Daniel, well, they're not just old stories. They're a detailed blueprint for the entire sweep of world history.
And that really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? The premise here is incredibly bold, that a single prophetic vision from thousands of years ago holds the key to understanding everything, from ancient Babylon to the world you and I live in today.
This passage right here from Daniel, it just immediately sets an epic, almost cinematic scale. See, the vision isn't just about earthly kingdoms coming and going. It's pointing toward a final, everlasting kingdom. And that idea, that's the foundation for this whole historical roadmap we're about to explore.
So you're probably wondering, how do you get from some mysterious vision with symbolic beasts to actual real-world history? Well, according to the author, the key is to decode them, with each beast representing a specific historical empire.
And the text lays it out pretty clearly. The sequence of beasts is said to line up perfectly with the great powers of the ancient world. The author identifies the first one as Egypt, the second as Mesopotamia, the third as the powerful Medo-Persian Empire, and the fourth, Greece.
Now, this is where the interpretation gets really specific. Take the second beast, Mesopotamia. The text says it has 3 ribs in its mouth. What could that mean? Well, the author claims it represents Noah's 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, the ones who repopulated the whole earth after the flood. And the command to devour much flesh? The text argues it's not about war, it's actually about the biblical instruction to be fruitful and multiply. It's this kind of symbolic decoding that's used for the whole prophecy.
This interpretation then acts as a bridge to the next major power. The fourth beast, Greece, is described as having 10 horns. In this view, those horns aren't 10 kings. They're the powerful Greek city-states, like Athens and Sparta, that built the cultural and political foundation for what would become the Roman Empire.
And that brings us to a really crucial part of the author's argument. The spotlight now shifts to Rome, and the interpretation of its legacy is, well, let's just say it's central to this whole prophetic timeline, and it's definitely controversial.
Okay, get this. The source argues that the Roman Empire didn't really collapse like we learn in history class. No, instead, it just transformed, it evolved, with its power structure and authority continuing through the rise of the Roman Catholic Church, which the author presents as the direct political and spiritual successor to the Roman Caesars.
To back this up, the author points to what they see as a major historical irony. They bring up St. Augustine, an early church father. The source argues that Augustine actually slammed the idea of a unified church state, calling it a pagan concept. But then, centuries later, his own writings were supposedly twisted and used by others to justify that very same political power.
And the text claims this philosophy is still alive and well. It points to this quote from a papal encyclical. The argument here is that by subordinating private property to common use, the institution is essentially claiming a kind of authority over all goods, which, in the author's view, is a direct echo of ancient Roman imperial power.
Okay, so let's fast forward from ancient philosophy all the way to modern geopolitics. The author argues that this prophetic roadmap didn't just end with Rome. They claim it continues to map directly onto the biggest global events of the last 100 years or so.
The author really zeroes in on 3 huge moments from the 20th century that they see as prophetic markers. First, the 1916 Sykes-Picot Agreement, which carved up the Middle East and created the borders we see today. Second, Hitler's rise in World War II, which the text frames as an attempt to revive the old Holy Roman Empire. And finally, and this is a big one, the re-establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, which is seen as an absolutely crucial sign of the end times.
So then this prophetic lens gets applied to today's global powers. The European Union? The text interprets it as the modern version of the revived Roman Empire. The UN Security Council is seen as just another piece of that same power structure. But then there's a really unique twist. The United States is identified with a specific biblical role, that of a shepherd David, whose destiny is to protect and help the restored nation of Israel.
All this history, the ancient empires, the modern politics, it's all building to a final, epic conclusion. The author uses the prophetic text to lay out a very specific timetable, a countdown to the final conflict. All right, so get ready for a little prophetic math here. The author starts with a 390-year punishment period mentioned by the prophet Ezekiel. Then they apply another biblical principle where that punishment gets multiplied 7 times. So 390 times 7 gives you a total of 2,730 years. Now stick with me. According to the source, if you start that clock in 721 BC, the year ancient Israel was scattered, it ends precisely in 2009 AD.
There's another key number that keeps popping up in these prophecies: 1260. The author uses a common interpretive method called the day for a year principle. It basically means that when the text says 1260 times days, it actually means 1260 times years. This number then becomes a crucial measuring stick for figuring out how long certain powers will last and how long periods of conflict will go on.
The source also puts 2 major end-time beliefs side by side, presenting them as rival narratives. Both Christian and Islamic traditions foresee a final global conflict, but the author highlights a critical disagreement: the role of Israel. In this Christian framework, Israel's restoration is a vital sign of the prophecy coming true. But in the Islamic view presented here, that very same event is seen as the work of a false prophet.
And that final conflict? We all know the name: Armageddon. But the author is very precise about this. It's not just a symbol for a world war. No, it's identified as a real, physical place, the mountain of Megiddo in modern-day Israel, which, interestingly enough, has been a strategic location for major battles throughout all of human history.
And all of this leads to one final, very specific prediction on the author's prophetic timeline. Based on their interpretation of Ezekiel's visions, the text predicts that the year 2370 AD is when the temple in Jerusalem will be reconsecrated, a huge moment that would mark the culmination of this entire end-time sequence. So there you have it. We've just walked through one very intricate, very detailed roadmap of history, all drawn from an ancient text. It's a map that claims to connect global empires to modern headlines and even predict our future. And the question that leaves us with is pretty simple, really. If this is one map of our world, what might other maps reveal?